Welcome back. So in this video we will go ahead and define the basket class. Again, we want to move the basket to the left and to the right on the screen and catch apples that spawn from the tree as we have it set up at this point. So we'll go ahead to Tools and we will create a new C++ class. We will select a pawn class. A pawn is an actor that can be possessed and that receives input from a controller. We do not need a character for this particular project. That includes the ability to walk around and stuff like that. We just want a simple pawn that we can move to the left and to the right on the screen. A pawn is an actor, but a character is a pawn. You can see a character is a type of pawn. So we want the simpler version, the pawn, and that is what we will stick with. I would like to note that you have something called the player controller, which is also an actor, and that is responsible for controlling a pawn used by the player. We won't be creating a specific player controller for this game, but we will be creating our own pawn. So I'll select that and next, and I will name that basket base. So in apple picker source apple picker, we will call that basket base, and I will create the class. Live coding succeeded, so I will go ahead and go to Visual Studio. Click reload, and in the basket base.h I want to set up some components. Notice that this class inherits from a pawn, and if I right click on that, pick definition, notice that a pawn derives from a actor. Alright, so again, a pawn is an a actor. Alright, so I want to go ahead and set up some components. Actually, before I do, notice one more thing down here. This is also different from the actor. We now have this function here. This is set up player input component. Later on in the lesson, we will use this to bind functions to input, functionality to input, so we can move the pawn to the left and to the right using, let's say, the A and the D keys or the left and the right arrow keys. Okay, let's continue on, and I will go ahead and create some components. For the root for this particular actor, the basket base, I want to create a uScene component. I will want to use a uScene component instead of a static mesh component. And then you can see I define a uStatic mesh component pointer here as well. Paddle1, again a pointer to a uStatic mesh component. In upcoming lectures we will have multiple paddles. We will have 3 paddles that makes up our basket. So I just named that paddle1 here. Okay, then in the basket base.cpp we want to go ahead and set up those default sub-objects. We want to set the uScene component as the root, and then we want to set the paddles, which are uStatic mesh components. We want to set the attachment to that root, that scene component. If you want to, you can pause the video and try this by yourself before you continue on. Okay, so you should have been able to do this by yourself at this point. If not, that's fine, just keep going. As I mentioned, we want that uScene component as the root, so we'll assign the root to the root component. Then we want to go ahead and assign the paddles, which will make up our basket eventually. We want to set those up, and we want to attach those to whatever the root is. So I do paddle1 set up attachment, and I pass in the whatever the root component is. Also, I'm using kind of vague names here, such as root and paddle1. You can modify that. Instead of calling it root, you can call that basket root component. Also notice that that should not conflict with existing identifiers such as root component. Same thing with the paddle. You can call that paddle mesh component if you want. I will go ahead and leave it like this. And that should be all that we need for right now, so I'll build that. Okay, back in the editor we want to create some sort of an asset to work with, so I will go and create a cube. Using the simple shapes, I'll just drag one in, and then with that selected I can go ahead and convert that cube to a static mesh. This is an easy way, so now we can select the folder. That is going to be a paddle, that is not going to be the actual basket, that is simply one part of multiple petals that will form our final basket. Alright, so I'll just go ahead and create that. SM for static mesh underscore petal. This will now have the default material applied, but that's fine. We can go ahead and change that later on. For example, in the materials, we can go and instantiate the base material again. I will instantiate the base material. I will call this mi for material instance underscore petal underscore 1. This just allows us some flexibility in the future to go ahead and maybe add a different material per petal if we want to do that for some reason. Call that petal 1, and that's fine for now. Delete what we have in the viewport, otherwise we can get confused with that. So under meshes again, I can now double click on that. Select the material in the material slots. Search for material instance petal 1, I select that material. It's basically the same as the default material that gets applied to the static meshes here in the editor. Dock that. Under show, we want to show simple collision, and it does not have simple collision. Under collision, I will add a box simplified collision. Now that green outline shows up. Save. Next we want to do the blueprint derivation, so we want to go ahead to the C++ classes. Under Apple Picker we have the basket base. We want to right click on that and we want to create a blueprint class based on basket base. Under blueprints, and that is going to be our basket. So bp underscore basket, I will create the blueprint class for that. In the blueprints you can see that now shows up. We have bp underscore basket. And then I will go ahead and I will define these. So we don't have to set anything up for the using component, which is the root. Then in the petal we want to go ahead and set up the static mesh for that. We only have one slot at the moment. We want to select our petal, and you can see that populates the material as well. So if we drag this out into the world now, notice that we simply have this cube. We want to make that look kind of like a petal. So with that selected, I will go and modify the scale. That will not be uniform, so I'll set that to 1 by 2 by 0.75. So 1 for x, 2 for y, and then 0.75 for z. The location and the rotation will be zeroed out. With that done, I will compile and save. And in the blueprint section, if I drag out a basket now, then we have this sort of petal. In the details, I'll just pin that. Search for pawn. We want to select auto possess player. We want to set this to player 0. This is typically set to player 0 because that basically means the first player. It's kind of like an array. We start at 0, not at 1. So the first player, we want that to possess this particular pawn. Auto possess player is going to determine which player controller should automatically possess the pawn when the level starts, when the pawn is spawned. Okay, so with that set up, we'll go ahead and save all. And I'll just toggle that off. Instead of simulating, we want to play in the selected viewport. Notice that I spawn if I press F8 to eject. Notice that we have spawned right in the center basically of the pedal. So that is no good. And in upcoming lectures, we will learn how we can go ahead and fix the camera, so we can do the setup of the camera. So that is going to wrap up the definition and the blueprint derivation of our basket, the basket pawn, and the pedal.